By 1999, a lot of the structural flaws in the way Railtrack was set up were really beginning to show through. The power of the zones, the multifunctional role that they had, the fact they were all different. Swindon did something different to Birmingham. The South East operated in a different way to Scotland. That was quite unsatisfactory for customers who were looking at the business and seeing how varied, how unorganised it was. And HQ, I think, found it quite difficult to keep control of that because it was all different, and also because a lot of people in HQ had never done those jobs. So it's quite difficult to know what was going on. Quite difficult to keep control, really.
Railtrack had sort of developed this corporate arrogance about the way that it dealt with its customers, with its suppliers. And this made it even more difficult, particularly at the front line, to try and build trust and to build sort of common objectives, to try and meet all these conflicting objectives.
The remit of the rail regulator covered three issues. Firstly, the regulation of Railtrack. Secondly, the overseeing of competition in the railway industry. And thirdly, the approval of track access agreements between Railtrack and train operators. When Tom Windsor was appointed in 1999, he'd had substantial experience of working in that framework, and he came with an incredible passion for the railway and for seeing it improving. I think he was frustrated that there had been not sufficient progress and that the underlying issues were not addressed. He clearly was of the view as well that the rail regulator wasn't doing enough to try and change that and help those things to change. So that heralded a change in gear, really, in the rail regulator, a much more proactive role, which was hyped up further in the reaction of the press, and inevitably created some more tension with Railtrack and the way they reacted to it to an extent.
The relationship with customers was beginning to get very difficult, almost inevitable because of the inequality in the relationship. They were all relatively small, Railtrack was huge, and it was a monopoly. That was bound to put a strain, and that was coupled because of the pressures the train operators were under. They needed to cut costs, they needed to economise, and they needed to grow their business, to run more trains, to get more passengers, to get more revenue. Railtrack wasn't really incentivised to do that. Indeed, it almost had a horror of growth. More trains meant more congestion, meant more performance. It really didn't want to know about growth. It wanted to deal with what it had got, whereas the train operators were desperate to increase business, to grow the railway. Railtrack found it very difficult to respond to that.
A large number of projects were running over time, over budget. It felt it was very, very difficult. A lot of projects that were being delivered, you felt that they hadn't done the proper risk analysis, hadn't thought through what risks there were to delivery. The perception was that West Coast route modernisation was hemorrhaging money. We could all see that the cost estimates had gone from something like 2.2 billion to talk of 16 billion. And all the time you had these conflicts where you was still being tasked to deliver higher performance, greater outputs and control costs.
Well, the Railtrack share price peaked at around £17 and then fell back to around £14 in the year after. And I think that was because of a growing appreciation of the risks in relation to the overall asset base of the company and its ability to bear those risks. So at privatisation, the company had been used very much as a risk sink for much of the rest of the industry. And in particular, it had taken on the West Coast project within the last year or so. And that was being explained to the city and the realisation that the company had taken on some very significant project risk and complexity, as well as the commercial arrangements at the time. So you take that lot together, perhaps with a growing political environment with the Labour government as well, and there was a real fallback in confidence at that time.
Relationships at this point were beginning to get a bit strained with other stakeholders, with the government, with the regulators, suppliers and customers. Not quite sure, Railtrack having put itself at the heart of the railway, where that really was taking it. Was it an engineering business? But a lot of the engineering expertise had gone outside at privatisation. Was it a supplier? Well, yes, it was, but it didn't always recognise customers perhaps as well as it might have. Was it an asset management business? Hadn't really focused on that. Was it an infrastructure developer in some of the big projects it was now getting involved in? Beginning to get a sense of a slightly confused set of relationships with a lot of other stakeholders.
This growth agenda was eating rapidly through the company's cash, and at the same time, the industry suffered some serious and tragic incidents, including Ladbroke Grove and Hatfield. In October 2000, when the root cause and the seriousness of gauge corner cracking became evident to Railtrack, principally because of the lack of knowledge that we had of our asset. Thousands of speed restrictions were imposed on the network, 20 mile an hour. Public perception fell through the floor. It almost felt, and it actually was, that the industry was imploding. You felt that you couldn't deliver a railway, operations were severely constrained. And it was probably at that time, it was the most stressful and demanding period, I think, of any railwayman's career. We were working round the clock to try and establish the knowledge of our asset. How serious was gauge corner cracking? How many sites did we have? At the same time, try and remove the speed restrictions that we've had to impose so that we could restore some normality and resilience to the train operations that we believed in, that we were so proud of at one stage.
So immediately after Hatfield, as soon as we recovered from the operational impact, it became apparent the financial impact was going to be huge. Over £600 million went out of the company in a few months as a result of both the penalty payments for delays and putting the track back in place. And we knew that we were going to have to seek some other sources of finance, because what it had meant was that we were unable to meet the commitments we'd made to draw down on our debt financing. And the most obvious source of alternative finance was from the government, and we entered into quite a protracted round of negotiations with them to agree quite a substantial additional subsidy from them. That was put in place around about the beginning of April. And even after that, within a couple of months, it became apparent that the company was going to take much longer to recover than we'd thought, and we were going to need even more funding to make sure we could last through the next 5 years. During that summer, the company just came under increasing intense pressure from pretty much every direction. The travelling public were just fed up with all of the delays on the network. The government had lost total confidence in the company because of its inability to recover or even predict its financial performance. The media was just every single day baying for blood, if you like. And on top of that, the city had lost confidence in the share price, was really questioning the underlying value that was left in the shares. So there are a whole range of options that were looked at to try and make sure that the company had the capital and the wherewithal to take it forward financially and operationally. And a lot of negotiations, discussions, looking at all of the things that might be done. Ultimately, of course, that was all to prove fruitless because in October 2001, the Secretary of State, Stephen Byers, put Railtrack into administration.
When Railtrack was placed into administration, there was an immense shock for the workforce, the company, the industry, that here was this organisation that was at the heart of the industry, and suddenly it just ceased to exist. What did it mean? What did it mean for our role? What did it mean for all the big projects that were still going on, for the structure, for our jobs? People had lost quite a lot of money through their shareholdings.
We had to respond to the shock of administration very quickly. We had a railway to run. So after the first day or two, it was a question of getting out to the staff to explain what had happened, explain what it might mean for them. For me, that meant mass meetings in London, up and down the route, in York and everywhere, talking to large numbers of staff to explain what the process was, to explain what had happened to their shareholdings in the business, and explain how I thought the future was going to unfold.
So when Railtrack went into administration, Alan Bloom obviously arrived as the administrator, and that was quite a shocking time for everybody that was involved. Over the weekend, we obviously heard that Railtrack had gone into administration. We were called in as the senior team on the Sunday and left in no uncertain terms, told in no uncertain terms that Alan had taken over with his colleagues. And it was very difficult, I think, both for those involved and for Alan himself, as whilst we were faced with all of our normal terms of reference taken away and somebody being there very much in place of the directors. For Alan himself, he was normally used to being able to take some big decisions about what continued to run and what didn't, and he couldn't do that with the railway because he had a service to keep going and a lot of people that he needed to run that service. So one of the first things that Alan Bloom had to do was to find a new CEO for the company. And in December 2001, John Armitt arrived. And on the whole, I think that was received very well by the people in the company. John had a high degree of credibility. He'd been involved in the railway before, but had a very good record in the construction industry. And he was very statesmanlike when he arrived.
When I arrived in December 2001, probably many people will have described Railtrack as a company in crisis. A crisis which flowed from follow-on from Hatfield and Ladbroke Grove before it and the loss of public confidence, and then the act of administration in itself, which was sort of the government essentially saying we have no confidence in Railtrack. So morale was very low. At the same time, people were now expected to cooperate with the administrator, Ernst & Young, who were there to understand the company and prepare a memorandum of sale so that Railtrack could be refloated at some time in the future. So my task, as I saw it, was to, in a way, help people through this period of crisis by re-establishing some confidence, re-establishing self-belief, really.
And it did unfold over the following few weeks. Things calmed down a bit. We established a good working relationship with the administrators. We kept the railway running. The money kept flowing. The trains kept running. And after 2 or 3 months, in a strange way, it had settled down, and we began to look at what would come next. How would we move on and get out of the position in which we'd got into?
And I think over time, what happened was this realisation that the industry was going to change, that the model that had been in place perhaps wasn't the right one, and therefore we was unable very gradually to get back to trying to deliver a safe and reliant railway. And the administration agenda was sort of much more about what was the future. The concerns were, what does it mean for the future when we come out of administration? Who would own us? Where would we be? So I think it was sort of two emotions going on at the time. One, that it was quite clear what we had to do on a day-to-day basis, but a real genuine concern about what did the future hold for the employees of Railtrack and the status of Railtrack.
We'd had Hatfield. We'd had the crash at Great Heck. We'd had Gauge Corner cracking. We'd had administration. And on top of that, then we had Potter's Bar. Another crash, down to the railway, down to maintenance. And I really think that was rock bottom about our relationship with the travelling public, and also about what we should do about maintaining and looking after the network. From then on, it just had to get better. We had to do things internally to sort out maintenance. We had to get back on top of the day job.
By the time we get to the spring of 2002, within Railtrack, we start to become aware of the fact that there is a potential new organisation which is called Network Rail, which is leading the competition in terms of who might take over Railtrack. In fact, it becomes fairly clear that probably they are the only real suitor. That, however, did not prevent the administrator from wanting to be very rigorous in managing the process, which then meant that there could not be regular contact between employees of Railtrack and the Network Rail team, who were only a few hundred yards away down the road in Tottenham Court Road. This had its pros and cons. I think from the Railtrack point of view, it was good because it meant that people could just concentrate on the day job, concentrate on re-establishing Railtrack as doing an effective job, gradually getting performance improved and doing the things which customers and government were looking for. What it meant, however, was a degree of frustration that they couldn't influence the thinking of Network Rail and make sure that the information that they were getting was the right information. And clearly, probably in the Network Rail camp, there would have been this sort of frustration that they couldn't actually get right inside Railtrack, but had to gather their knowledge of it very much from third parties and from written documentation rather than actually being able to talk to the people. By the time we get to the end of September and early October of 2002, people within Railtrack know that it is absolutely certain that there's going to be the new organisation, Network Rail. They know the names of the individuals in Network Rail, but they've yet to actually meet them. I've had a couple of meetings with them, at which I've established with Ian McAllister and Adrian Montague that I will continue as the chief executive. But beyond that, what we've got is largely rumour. Rumour from probably July onwards as to what the date will be when the transition actually takes place. And, of course, endless rumour about the plans of Network Rail, which different people think they know, but nobody has actually got any firm evidence. So a lot of expectation around October the 2nd, 3rd, everybody wondering what is going to happen on October the 4th.